for anyone who might have missed it. So if you want to stay off camera, please do so. And we will be sharing the slides from today following the session as well as part of our ENA newsletter, and they'll be available on our website. And if you have any questions afterwards, you want to share some additional feedback, please do drop us an email on opennetworks@energynetworks.org. Okay, so in today's agenda, we'll be starting with kind of an overview of what we've done so far in 2023, covering the GB Flex figures that were published in August, sharing our new success framework with you, and then walking through some of our work areas in more detail. So we'll be looking at common Flex products that we've developed this year, how we've aligned pre-qualification questions, how we're looking to align settlement processes, and how we're working to make dispatch systems more interoperable. And then we'll just finish off with what's coming up next for Open Networks for the rest of this year and this work plan, looking at upcoming events, and then we will have a good chunk of time at the end to speak to you all as well and get your feedback and your thoughts. So for the first slot, just passing over to Avi, our head of Open Networks.
Thank you, Helen, and welcome everybody to the Insights for Open Networks. I'm delighted to speak to everybody here, and I have taken the liberty to start off slightly on a higher level that I would have normally started. This is based off of some of the feedback we received earlier in the Insights Forum. We are now delighted to let you know that we have nearly 200 individuals signed up for the Insights Forum, many of them from various different countries. And that also means that they don't always have access to the meeting live, so they look at it on the recordings. But what that also means is that we have varied levels of understanding and engagement with the program. So one thing that became clear to us that we can't always work with the assumption that everybody on the call are obviously well versed with it. Very conveniently, that has been our incorrect assumption historically, but we are looking to ensure that we are at least giving you a high level context of what we are about, what we are here for, and perhaps on the more granular level, what we're doing. So next slide, please, Helen. So I'll just give a really quick, brief, intro to the program. And for some of those who are familiar with the program, I do apologize because you've probably seen this over the 5 years or 6 years now. But just as a quick context, Open Networks kicked off in 2017 as a transition or a network innovation program as a whole that is setting out to transition the existing networks to a more smart and flexible energy system. So we were driven by the net zero mandate at the time, the 2017 Smart System Flex Plan, and now the 2021 Smart System Flex Plan, the general stakeholder input and the wider policy and regulatory discussions that are ongoing through DESNZ and within the steering group as well. So we started off with our journey on multiple threads of different work. First of them being the distribution system operation, informing the transition, flexibility markets, connections, data, and driving wider efficiency as a whole. So this has been our approach right from the start. And the next slide, please, Helen. Just to give you a bit of context of the journey then. So we started off in, like I said, in mid 2017, and the key focus at the time was the DSO transition. So we did a fair amount of work to inform this transition, including modelings and assessments, and giving the network and perhaps the wider industry tools of understanding what the future scenarios can be. And as far as the networks and the regulatory space is concerned, it's no longer in transition. It's now embedded within each network company business. So that came to a logical conclusion at the beginning of ED2. Whilst those functions, as you will see through the rest of the program, are being are developed and delivered through the program and with individual DNOs, but the transition as such is no longer in play. It's because BAU now. We also had elements of connections and whole system that we had picked up in the past. So we had developed the embedded capacity register queue management interactivity guide, each of them at different stages of regulatory code modification and deployment. But now connections being as important as it is now in the industry, it's gone and become a program in and of itself with the strategic connections group. They are leading the development and the challenges currently faced by connections as a whole. The whole system, we did some element of work supporting the wider LAEP and the local areas in general. So we developed the common system, the whole system cost benefit analysis tool. we are currently working on the best practice guide within ENA as well, and wider coordination between gas and electricity members. But now that also obviously is becoming more important, and having the whole system thought process is probably the key to many of our future steps. So that's currently being progressed under the umbrella of the whole system strategy group. So then coming down to the other bits that were part of the open networks as flexibility and T&D coordination, especially related to data. So that has lived a very active life over its past 5 odd years. So first couple of years we spent in developing a robust business case and a commitment from all the networks to go flex first, and develop robust market principles to set up the local flex market. Next couple of years was developing the technical specs and the processes associated with, and essentially moved to BAU. And that's currently remains the main focus of open networks as well. Next slide, please. So this is a one slide view of I guess the journey of local flex market in Great Britain. So this is what ENA and Open Networks tend to call flex figures, and we publish this annually. So this is a representation on the slide here. You'll see is that we have charted the contracted and tendered flexibility that's cumulative of all the network companies put together over the years. And this trend is something that is obviously informing some of our activities, and obviously informing the wider world as well of how the market is progressing. Some key figures that I would like to draw your attention to, or key aspects of these figures, is first 3 years we were reporting this on a calendar year. We've then aligned it to a regulatory year, just so that we can align with the license condition that Ofgem have put on the DNOs to report these flexibility figures as well. So that way, what we're able to do is we're ensuring that the information that's out there as flex figures, and the source of information we use is consistent, and then obviously having that level of comparison is always useful. So whilst we did shift, the reporting still remains every 12 months, so they still remain comparable in that capacity. And in terms of the actual trend, I think it's quite important to note that networks continue to find opportunities to secure more and more flexibility. But over 2021 and 22, we have seen a level of certain level of stagnation on the contracted capacity, which was at around 1.8 gigawatts, 887. But at the time, we obviously regrouped as a program, as DNOs coming together to see that, okay, we need to do something different to unlock that bit of gap between the tendered and contracted. And that is perhaps our key guiding star for everything we are doing this year, is identify where the barriers are, what the reasons for not achieving that bit of, the gap between the blue and the orange, and put measures in place such that we are able to get the best out of the requirement that is currently being generated from the networks. So it is reassuring, because the measures we've started putting in place has started delivering dividends, because the last chart you see, the 2.4 and 4.5, is the first 3 months of this regulatory year, and we've already exceeded the previous 12 months. So the efforts are delivering value to both the networks and the flex service providers out there, and we are quite confident that going forward in the rest of the regulatory year, with the several measures we put in place, we're likely to get a good jump in that. But equally important takeaway for us is the technology breakup. This year, first time we've not only collated the flexibility as an aggregated figure, we've also then broken that contracted flexibility into the type of technology that's delivering this flex service. And it's quite, I think it's insightful to see that it's only, I think 19% is directly attributed to fossil fuel sources, and the remaining, more than 70% is from non-fossil fuel sources like stored energy, solar, biofuel, water. The bit about others, for somebody who's probably going to go into the detail of these figures, is either miscellaneous sources that are not currently classified in the C31E, that's a license condition requirement, as technology types, or in some instances there were historical contracts that we didn't have the technology type for. Because whilst we started accumulating the figures of technology type this year, there were few contracts that were contracted in a few years earlier, whose attributes of the technology were not logged in at the time. So keeping that at that broad brushstroke, we are quite comfortable saying that certainly more than 70% is from low carbon technology, which is, I think, a really insightful information, because one of the challenges for us is to have more and more low carbon technology come onto the network. And with this market available for them to participate, it's really nice to see that this is what it's driving the market forward. Next slide, please. So coming back to the point I raised in the earlier slide. So this year we took a step back and tried to turn our approach around to see that what is the market need from us to ensure that the liquidity of this market is improved. So based on our extensive work with our stakeholders through the challenge group and other avenues, including the Insights Forum, many of the members have reached out to us offline with their views and expertise. Thank you very much for that, and please continue to do that. But what that has helped us in the earlier this year was to set out a key objective for ourselves, and we all our efforts are focused on these three kind of, you can call it objectives, or our guiding star in a way of speaking. So we are looking to make it easier for flex service providers to participate in the market through standardization of products, processes, contracts, and tools, if appropriate. We're looking to improve operational coordination between networks and companies to remove barriers to dispatch of services. So this is perhaps less out in the open, but it's very important that the network companies themselves, streamline the processes such that there are no systemic barriers coming into play in proliferation of the market. And then last but not least, putting measures to improve transparency of process and decision making. So this has multiple layers as well. When it says transparency, it could be just a clear articulation of what is being done. It could be data sharing with non-network stakeholders. It could be a case of talking more to the right targeted stakeholder engagement, wherein we are able to hear from them and they are able to understand some of the efforts we're putting. So there are layers to this, but in all capacity, we are focusing all our efforts in those three categories of activities, if you can call it that. So this is how we've gone about doing it. My colleague Reese is probably going to step in next to kind of articulate these things further, because what we've now done is, whilst it's all well and good to set up at the high level, it's also equally important to see what outcomes we're delivering at the end of the year and what it means to the stakeholder. So we've tried to go away and do that exercise, clearly articulate, saying what it is we'll deliver, which of them we think is in scope, out of scope, and if they are out of scope, why they're out of scope. It could be a capacity issue in terms of our resources. It could be very well that it's something that we cannot fix because of the nature of the our setup. So there are quite a few things that perhaps, as people tend to say, devils in the detail. We've tried to be as articulate and as clear as possible, such that we are working with the industry to ensure that even though we are keeping something in and out of scope, we are able to have a debate about what can be done. And if there are levers beyond the program, that can become a learning to all our stakeholders, because right now we continue to work very closely with Ofcem and DESNES on the program. They both continue to sit on the steering group and working closely to ensure that, one, we deliver on our commitments. Second one, it's fit for purpose, and it's value for the end customers as well. So this collective program, putting together all the members, I think we have collectively, if you put together, including 200 network company members contributing to the program directly, there are, including the Insights Forum and all the stakeholder groups, it all comes together to over 400 people who are directly contributing this program. So I thank you, and I also want to reflect on the fact that it's been an interesting journey, and it's probably worth remembering that the program itself is setting up to transition and help us go into this journey. But it's also useful to kind of determine those milestones in that journey, which is what we try to do with our success framework. I'll pause now before I hand over to Reese to go through the details of what we're going to be delivering this year. But it's perhaps an opportunity for me to have a quick chat with you and answer some of the questions, either on the history of what we're doing, and then if you have something that you need to be, you want to speak more about, I'm more than happy to. I have zipped through these slides, noting that I didn't want to go away harping about something you already know, but I'm very much mindful of the fact that this is quite a diverse audience. So feel free to ask any questions, or you think that I would like to elaborate more. I will be more than happy to. I'll pause for a moment before I start talking further. Any questions? Any thoughts from anyone? And do feel free to come off mute and come on camera, because we want this to be a bilateral discussion, and everybody, I would love them if you could participate. So feel free to jump in. Are there no questions? Helen, are there any questions on the chat? I'm sorry, I don't seem to have access to the chat just yet.
No, no questions at the moment. So I think maybe we can move on to the next slide for now.
Okay. Next slide, please. I'll just give a quick introduction before I call Reese in possibly. So this is quite a wordy slide, and Reese, our technical advisor, will probably go through the details of the content of that slide specifically. But what we are looking to do with this is trying to give a one-page summary of what we are doing, because quite often, being as dense a program as we are, we tend to struggle with communicating what it is that we do. So I think, it's very important for us to be able to articulate that. So in terms of the three objectives we set ourselves out there, we've then positioned these main outcomes to then fit that kind of pockets of areas we've identified. And each of them constitutes, say, some amount of standardization. We then have a view of the target dates. So this time around, we have stepped up our overall approach to doing things in a way that we will offer a clear view of which DNO is deploying these things and by when. And that is perhaps in the interest of the wider market qualification, because as an asset developer, if you're looking to engage with the market, it's probably important to understand how the user experience is in one DNO versus the other. And we are trying to do our best to ensure that it is consistent. So knowing that some DNOs are currently deploying this by when is really crucial. Whilst we have recently convened as a collective, all the directors of the DNOs or DSO, if you can call it that, have come together to discuss and commit to these timelines. And what we're looking to do is develop some of these things, the results that we have here, which Reese will talk about shortly, and pass it on to the networks to then go and deploy them as well, so that it's not just a very convenient document. It's actually implemented in action, so that come April 2024, these things that we're trying to achieve actually hits the market, and the stakeholders are able to go away and experience it firsthand. So that's the overall structure we've set out. And if you can access the success framework, which we will share on the comments shortly, you will see that each of these entries will have a detailed description of what is the expected outcome, and a bit of an articulation of what it constitutes, what it doesn't constitute, and why, like I mentioned earlier, along with a chart of when we think we will have this implemented, and the visibility of, if some of them have been completed, which of them DNOs have published it and when they've done it. So that's the way we've set up the success framework. And this framework is something we've developed with extensive discussion with our stakeholders as well, because it's very important that what we do, as much as alignment is required in the industry, it's also important that it's fit for purpose. So we are very mindful of the fact that, whilst we work and strive to converge, the point of convergence is agreeable to everybody in this space, as both network company members and the external stakeholders. So that's the overall structure for our success framework. I'll now probably call on to Reese to go through some of the details of the actual content here, please. Over to you, Reese.
Thanks, Avi, for the introduction and the brief summary. Yeah, so just starting with the top slide. So we have in order to, as Avi said, we've got this slide here articulating the kind of stakeholder impact of each one of the technical working groups we have ongoing this year, so you can understand exactly what that means for you in a very high level, as stated on these slides. So, for instance, our standardization of Flex Products Technical Working Group has committed to aligning the products, 80% of the products and the technical specifications across DNOs. So previously, we had the standard sustain, secure, dynamic, and restore products. They were called the same names, but in terms of the kind of technical standards and specifications behind them, with each DNO, they were implemented in a slightly different manner. So now the technical working group has been working hard this year to make sure that the user experience is consistent throughout the process and across each geographic region and DSO. So now when you engage with the various markets, secure, because obviously the naming conventions are slightly different now, but if it's called the same name, it will be implemented the same way across the networks. So that will make the user experience a lot more consistent and easier for FSPs involved. And again, we have Laura, which who's presenting later on this, and we'll expand more upon the good work that the technical working group has been doing, and we're very happy with the work they've done this year. Moving on to standardization of pre-qualification. So this each network company previously kind of had, as you're aware, varying sets of commercial and technical criteria and questions that you had to fill out in order to be able to provide services. And there was an extensive list of a couple hundred different varied questions. Now that has been consolidated into a much smaller list, and the commercial and technical questions will be consistent across each DNO, so that it'll be a lot easier for you to sign up and again access multiple market areas. And then in addition, there'll be some kind of guidance provided to those questions as well. So it's clear for those, completing these applications, exactly how each field should be filled out, and there's no ambiguity behind that. So I think that's a really great thing for the market, and allows, as I said, that consistent user experience and easy to understand and engage with it. Then moving on to standardization of flexibility contracts. This is kind of, this kind of makes big steps into moving towards a kind of framework agreement for flexibility providers, so that when the legal costs associated with creating new contracts or engaging with different markets, as I said before, the legal costs are a lot less, because the overarching framework will be the same. It'll be kind of just like the service terms within the agreement that are specific to kind of the sort of service you're providing that will need to be amended or varied, when you're delivering, basically. So that's a big win. I think it makes it a lot easier and reduce the costs on the consumer and yourselves for providing those services. Next, moving on to standardization of dispatch API. As I said, we've committed for all DNOs to adopt this common API specification by April 2024. So this will mean basically that everyone, FSP, regardless of what platform you're engaging with, will be speaking the same language. So you have that kind of consistent user experience throughout the kind of whole flexibility providing service, and you can easily access with those multiple interfaces without needing to kind of convert to a different API system or get new systems and infrastructure in place. So that's a great way to kind of broaden your horizons, engage with multiple markets in a consistent manner. Next, moving on to standardization of the settlement process. This is just simply, a standardized process for that settlement. Once the service has been provided, you can expect that whole payment process and baselining process to be consistent across all DNOs. So again, it's about that whole journey of a dispatch and both settlement being kind of aligned and standardized across the network. Next, moving on to primacy rules. So this is a very big one here, and we kind of normally have a standing agenda for primacy rules, but unfortunately not for this session. But basically that means that clear, consistent rules to manage conflicts arising within the networks provides, allows DSOs to provide, more visibility of the network and ensure there's less conflicts arising, when varying services are conflicted, basically. So to ensure like consistent operation of the networks. Next, moving on to harmonization of data sharing between DNO and ESO. So this will basically mean that each of the this will mean that markets will benefit from improved efficiencies within the network company's processes and confidence in improved confidence in the operational forecasting. So currently DNOs exchange data with ESO in varying manners and formats, and that means that we can. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. Let me start again. So that means that DNOs will exchange this data with ESO in a consistent format, which allows ESO to better plan and forecast, so that we have better visibility of the network and how it's operating, which will mean that we have more confidence in the operational forecasting. Sorry, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, Sorry about that. Sorry, I'm having some audio issues on my end, so apologies for the pauses. Next, we're moving on to harmonization of DER visibility information. So this basically means that the information we receive from DER assets will be consistent. This will allow the network to be more streamlined, and then visibility will be improved to allow that consistent data flow information from DER to DNO. So that, again, that part leads on to the whole kind of improving in the operational forecasting, both for the DNO and potentially at a later point ESO. Next, moving on to these kind of 4 blocked out items we have here. These all kind of relate to regulatory requirements and submissions. So this will basically allow stakeholders to be better informed of major network developments with a sufficient level of detail to assist and aid in their planning and forecasting activities. So that includes our consistent network development plans, consistent network coordination activities, consistent carbon reporting, and consistent flex reporting. So again, as I said, these are all license conditions, and we've basically just been working to make sure that these are all aligned, and we're providing you as much information as we feasibly can to kind of better plan and develop your business plans going forward. Yeah, I'll pause now if there's any questions from anyone on that. Happy to take any thoughts, considerations, feedback. Obviously, we have a few of these groups here that will obviously expand on those areas later, but yeah, happy to take any questions at this stage.
Great. Thanks so much, Reece, for that great overview. There's one question on the chat. I think this is around operational data sharing. Just a question on how frequently will DNOs share their data with ESO?
I think it depends on the data type. It really does. It ranges from real time to kind of week ahead to outage data that's like every 32 weeks, that sort of thing. So it really depends on the data asset. Sorry, Abby.
Just to add to that, I think it was Ian's question, wasn't it? Ian, early last year, we produced a document which listed all the data that's currently being exchanged and the frequency and the weights being exchanged, as here's the current landscape of it. So what we are doing this year is going through that list and finding out the minimum sets of information that's required from an operational perspective to optimize the things we are doing. For example, primacy rules, it's all well and good to develop those rules, but in order to deploy them, there needs to be a certain data flow that needs to be achieved across all the DNOs and ESO to achieve it. So those are the kind of conversations we are having. So whilst there isn't an answer to say for the, this is the frequency of it, like Reece just mentioned, it is very specific to the data set, and we are looking to see what is the commonality we can achieve across the board for that one.
Yep, sure. I'll plug that in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. The document also has a list of directly or indirectly related code modifications that influence this, because one of the challenges in this space is the fact that many of the data sets are governed by some of the existing codes. That's also part of that list, but happy to share that list on the chat somewhere. Just bear with us if we can just dig it out. It'll be in the chat shortly, but till then we can probably take on the next question.
Great, thanks, Abby. Question from Howard on the chat. What does part of continued development mean, and how does it link to the target dates?
So we have there are entities here that is perhaps too big for us to solve in one go. So, for example, the concept of interoperability is huge, because interoperability of systems depends on which system we are speaking about. So we've picked up dispatch systems specifically this year, and we're looking to have a consistent interoperability in the dispatch approaches from the flexibility services. However, in order for us to have actual true interoperability, that's the need of the hour, we probably need to step out and look wider. And similarly for primacy. At the moment, we are looking to develop rules and the backend infrastructure and data flows required to implement this. But the number of potential conflicts, if you take the permutations, are in thousands. So in order for us to say that we've actually delivered as a rule for every single potential outcome, regardless of the probability of their occurrence, it's still going to be a fair amount of work, which will probably be something of emphasis next year as well. So what we've set out this year is a very specific articulated remit as a subset of the broader theme of interoperability. On the API bit, it's for, then the interoperability is for dispatch. For primacy, we've identified our increments 1, 2, and a plan for future increments, how we'll use our experience to exponentially raise the number of use cases we take on board. So that's what I mean by continued development, because we want to progress, and we want to progress to specific targets, but noting that that is not a one-stop solution to the entire problem that we are currently mentioning there. Does that
Brilliant, thanks.
does that make sense, Howard? Any follow-up questions?
No, it's great. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Howard. We've got a question from Helen on the chat as well. How adaptable are the target dates and outcomes depending on what happens with the various Ofgem consultations?
So fortunately, Ofgem is working very closely with us. So I think the way we are currently looking at it is we've identified the key enablers that is required in this space and are not necessarily positioned for or against any specific approach. So these things we've set out on your screen here are the minimum sets of activities which are essential for the proliferation of the market, and whichever the route that the future development, any policy outcomes are taking, one, we are being very watchful of that and ensuring that we are not doing anything that's directly in conflict or opposing to that. And second one is we're also being agile to see if there's anything that's directly or indirectly influencing this. We are able to work with them closely to ensure that we are either adapting or ready to adapt as and when they do come to us.
Brilliant, thanks, Avi. Question from Lewis regarding standardization of the Flex products. Why have we made 80% our target rather than 100, and are we planning on working to 100 at a later time?
So just to clarify that, Lois, I think the standardization of products is that the specification of the products we are looking to bring is going to be standardized through and through, as in 100%. The products are going to be standardized. The 80% constitutes to the volume of flexibility. So in the flex figure chart, so we had 4.6 that have been tendered by, say, last year. Our target is to ensure that 80% of that volume comes out of the standard products, and the other 20% are going to be either that's something that's bespoke to a specific area or some trials that which could perhaps then become a new standard. So we don't want to be in a place where we standardize 100% and we block possible innovations to help us get more flexibility out there. But we should also very keen to ensure that there is sufficient standardization in the overall procurement landscape such that the market is progressing towards that. So the way we are looking at it is, I think Laura is next on the agenda, so she'll probably be able to shed more light on the specifics of it. The specs we are releasing for the standard products are going to be standardized 100%. The 80% constitutes to the volume of flexibility that's going to be procured.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense.
Great, thanks, Avi. Got a question from James on, will the standard APIs include fields and attributes or just specify the protocol? Conscious we have this item coming up, so there will be a lot of detail, but Avi, is there anything you want to say before we get there?
I mean, a couple of things. That first, I'm not the subject matter expert on this, so really good question. Thank you. And precisely for this kind of conversation, we have a specific agenda item with the subject matter experts coming along, so we're probably able to pick that up. But having said that, we are looking to have these conversations with you to see what would constitute a good outcome in this. So, James, if this is an area of expertise and you would want to contribute, there will be a shout out to everybody on the call here to come along and have that conversation with us. So I'll just say that and pass it back to Helen, considering we are, I think, on time for the next agenda.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Avi. Yeah, so thank you all so much for your questions. We'll have more time towards the end as well, so do ask if anything else comes up. But next on the agenda, I'll pass on to Laura Brown from Northern Power Grid and her co-lead Guy Shapland from Scottish Power Energy Networks to tell us more about these common flexibility products.
Thanks, Helen. I'll put my camera on just to show you that I'm a real person, but I'm going to switch it off so you can concentrate on the slides. So my name is Laura Brown, the Commercial Manager for Flexibility Services at Northern Power Grid, and I co-chair the Technical Working Group for Flexibility Products with Guy Shapland from SPEN. I'm not sure Guy's going to be able to make it today, but it's just to make it clear that there's a team effort here today. I'm just going to if we move on to next slide. Thank you. So ENA likely developed 4 distinct products for flexibility markets, and those came in, I think were developed in 2018 and have been used pretty comprehensively across all the DNO companies with regards, but there has been a bit of slight local interpretation of how products could be used as we get more liquidity in the market, and we have to adjust parameters to allow new asset types, allow customers who can be flexible but can't fit into the original standardised product form. So what we've found is there's been a bit of deviation, and we've got a strong steer from the industry from FSPs last year that they'd like that standardisation to be understood and removed if at all possible. So the technical working group got the challenge to go ahead with this. So I think the next slide. Yeah, I came to the earlier insights meeting this year to explain what our plans were for this. And what the challenge was. So what we've been doing since then is really looking in detail about all the products that are being procured and how the DNOs are using those products and what they're using them for, and then trying to understand all the variations that have been coming out from the industry about where they see the problems with those interpretations. So what we've found is we've reviewed all those, almost characterised them to the nth degree, found out where all the variations are, and then what we've done is agree as a collaborative group of DNOs is to say that actually we can standardise on these and we'll fix these for future, so that any deviations in the future will be eliminated. So we came up with a proposal of how we could do that and implement that. And we made that recommendation to the steering group and the other governance parts of the ENA, including the focus group that we had with stakeholders in the summer. And we then went to seek implementation, and we've been doing, as I said, a lot to make sure everyone's happy with meeting everybody's requirements. So as it stands just now, we've completed the development. We've been engaging with the market throughout, and we've now got the OK from everyone who needs to give us the OK, including the ENA Open Networks Challenge Group and the regulator to go ahead with this proposal. So this is what we're showing today. Because of that, because of these updates that I'm going to present today, we'll revise the product catalogue, revise the stackability report where applicable, and we'll provide a flexibility products chooser tool to help people who are not familiar with these type of markets about what their assets might be able to play into. So the way we've approached the standardisation is to look at our flexible services and define them by common product parameters. And these have been characterised by the market structure, the availability and utilisation. And that has meant we've been able to define 5 standard products. So 4 that you might be familiar with and 1 brand new one to meet a new opportunity. And the products are aligned by all GB DNOs and DSOs, and a variant is allowed for 1 parameter, generally response time, to ensure that we can capture all the market use cases for these products. I mentioned future-proofing. We don't want to allow deviations to creep back in. So we've put the challenge back to the ENA to come up with some governance of this, and they're looking to deploy, to develop an engineering recommendation in this or something similar that will take care of this in the future. But to be clear, we're not looking to do any evolutions in the next 6 months. So these 5 standard products are the ones that are fixed and governed for the immediate term. And here they are. I've just presented them here in the format that you may be used to in the table. I'll go into a little bit more detail about the background in the next couple of slides. But as I say, there's 5 products: the scheduled utilisation, operational utilisation, a peak reduction, so this is the new one, and then the more near-term planning ones: operation utilisation with scheduled availability, and operational utilisation with variable availability. So those are meeting the network needs that the DNOs and DSOs are looking for. And I'll put some examples there of how these might be used, but the list is actually quite extensive now. We've got quite a lot of use cases for these products. But trying to give you some examples of how it might be used to give you some context. The first 3 products incur a utilisation payment only, and the second 2, because they're a bit more responsive in near time settings, and have an availability and a utilisation payment. So when you look at these 5 products, and I mentioned a variant that we might do around about time, you can start to see how these have, where the differences are between the products. So the first 3, peak reduction, scheduled utilisation and operational utilisation, there's no availability agreement required up front. It's all associated with the time of trade. Operational utilisation will agree the utilisation nearer time. And then we've got different delivery methods. We either need that delivery to be continuous, or the new product that we mentioned, peak reduction, allows a peak load reduction. So maybe not continuously, but just perhaps one way of thinking about it is it's reducing the peaks, cutting off the peaks over a period of time. Hopefully this is self-explanatory, but if you take a product on the left-hand side and just follow the arrows of the same colour, you'll get to see the products and then how they map to the product variants. So 100 ways to look at this, and this is one of them. So when it comes to these products and how we plan to migrate to them, the plan is at the moment the anticipated dates are linked to the next procurement rounds for the DNOs. So some of us are already partway through our autumn tender round, so are looking to do this in the spring. Some other companies might be able to pull that forward a little, but we all look to be from at least mid next year. Most of the standardised products we do will be on these 5 products we just listed there. There is some dependencies to that schedule, as you might imagine. There's some system changes need to happen. Our needs assessment, for example, our procurement processes, the service selection and the scheduling, dispatch and settlements. We've been engaging with all our colleagues in these different areas, and they're aware of the changes, but they're going through some E&A reviews themselves. So it's just make sure these are all tied up and implemented correctly. Then we've got contractual changes to service terms and payment calculations. Just to be clear, we're not proposing to go back to anything that's already been procured. This is just for future product procurement. And then we've got the communication and education of the market, including what we think will be an Excel spreadsheet or maybe a web-based tool which can help asset owners identify which market they could play into with which products. That's all I've got to present with today, but just to say we've kind of on track for the delivery of the outcome that we was asking for, and thanks to everyone. There's a number of people in the call today I know have engaged with us actively in this process, so just big thank to all the stakeholders who've helped us develop this. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you so much for that, Laura. Got no questions on the chat, but everyone please do feel free to put your hand up and come off mute if you've got a question now.
Yes, hi, James Atkinson from Apex. It sounds like there's a bit of overlap with the products. So if some just have an availability payment and some just are utilization only. Sorry. Yeah, you could have had one combined product that has a reserve and util component, but just allowed utilization only orders to also enter that product. So you would end up procuring the same thing, but without providers having to choose between 2 separate products. So I'm just wondering if there's any sort of potential in the future to merge some of these products again.
Yeah, what we haven't presented here, and will do when we publish our long E&A report, as it's called, but basically the specification for these products will be published in the next couple of weeks. So that'll tell you more of the details. So behind if you lift the lid of the car boot, if you like, the car bonnet, there's there's a fair bit of technical detail behind what the differences are between these products, which might answer your question.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure of Apex's business, but we can share that with you just now, as it's kind of been shared with some of the platform providers as briefing notes already. So we have got documents we can share ahead of the final publication of that longer report, if it's helpful to you to try and understand the variance between the products. But you might, if you still think you're onto something, then by all means we welcome that to be proposed as a potential product. The more we're keen to have a standardized products, and we're keen to have a low number so that there's not a lot of options, because the more complicated you make it, the less the more barriers it's felt is happening, and certainly that's what we're told from our regulator. So we're actively encouraged to keep it nice and simple. But if there's a new product that's even better than the ones we've got, we'd very much like to hear about it. By no means do we think we've got this nailed down. This will be a continuously evolving program of work.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's not that it's sort of a separate product. It's just a way to sort of try and minimize how many separate products you have, and potentially just allow more of the products to be optimized and sort of considered at the same time.
Okay.
But yeah, I'd be very happy to sort of review and feed into any process.
Okay, I'll ask Helen to share the briefing notes with you. I'll forward them on to her.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, James. Louis has a hand up as well.
Hi there, Laura. Louis from Cub here. So just in terms of the names, are they set? Are they done and dusted, or are they still sort of open to change, Laura?
I think the feedback we've got so far is everyone really prefers it to say what it does on the tin, if that's a phrase that you're familiar with.
Yeah.
There's some of our marketing colleagues were encouraging us to come up with snappier names, like has been used in the past. But I think depending on your appetite for understanding what each product does, the new naming convention seems to be accepted. But there is this. That is a good question, because we've had a lot of debate about what we would do. I think at the end of the day, a particular DNO can call them whatever they like. As long as what they're doing with it, and it's as long as they're procuring it and it's a product that does exactly the same as the others, and we can cross-reference. So if Northern Power Grid, for example, decides to call one of the products BERT, as long as you know that with Northern Power Grid's BERT is that product, then that's a marketing challenge. I wouldn't recommend it, and certainly not what I would recommend to my company. But at the end of the day, these are just labels.
Okay.
What's your particular thought? I'd be interested.
I mean, from my perspective, it's clear.
That.
I guess it's the aim of all of this work really to improve market liquidity and access and what have you. And I think for someone that's new to the market, whilst we understand it, I mean,
Yep.
Okay, a marketing kind of style name doesn't say any more than that does, but operational utilization and variable availability product is quite a mouthful. Was my only thought. So yeah, just some feedback. And then just one more question, Laura. Sorry, and this may be more for Rhys or Avi. When new products are launched, so for example, I'm aware that UKPN, because we work fairly closely with those guys, have day-ahead product in the pipeline and looking to launch an energy efficiency product. What's the play with that in terms of how that ties into to this piece of work going forward?
So that'll come through the ENA governance structure. So that would be a notification of change. to
Okay.
the other DNOs that they would like to propose this. So, for example, that energy efficiency one comes from the UKPN Innovation Project that we're doing. They explained what it is to us, and we're like, yeah, that's a brilliant one. Let's all do that. I'm not quite sure of the day ahead one yet, but a lot of the adoption of these comes down to the tools available to the different DNOs. Some of us, you know, might have more sophisticated tools for some elements of this market than others. So we might not be able to all adopt them, but if they come forward through innovation and say this is worth deploying to BAU, they have to make the case to the change board, and then it'll get adopted. I can't see there being any problems other than the steer that we're getting to try and keep the volume of products down. But if it adds extra liquidity to the market, then it's a win-win, I think. So, but we would have a nice, you know, audit trail, if you like, of where it came from, why it was needed, what the benefits were, and then agreement, you know, and then it becomes part of our standard product package, if you like. That's the plan anyway. So it's almost like taking open networks into sort of how we would normally do changes in a network company. Someone proposes it, makes the case, gets the authorization, and then it's implemented and signed off. So that's what we're trying to get to with this one.
Lovely, thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Laura. Are there any other questions before we go on to our next topic? No, I don't see any hands up. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Helen Sorden from National Grid Distribution, who is leading ENA's work around aligning procurement processes. So over to you, Helen.
Helen, I don't think we can hear you.
Oh, hi, sorry.
There we
I forgot
go.
to put my microphone down. Can you hear me now?
Yep, all good, thanks.
Hi. Right, yes. So yeah, Helen Sorden, Technical Working Group Lead for procurement processes. So this year we've been predominantly looking across aligned pre-qualification processes. So on the screen now, just a reminder really of what we've been focusing on this year. So the objectives we were set were to look at some of the gap analysis that we undertook in 2022, comparing the different approaches that DNOs have across commercial and technical pre-qualification into flexibility markets, and then also undertake some stakeholder engagement to sort of review and consolidate and propose a standard template that all DNOs can adopt for those pre-qualification requirements, and then set out clear templates for use and a clear implementation plan of when DNOs would adopt these templates. In addition to that, we also had a challenge from the steering group, so make sure we deliver full technical and commercial standardisation, try and exceed the deliverable timeline, and make sure we remove all barriers and achieve so that we can achieve prompt internal implementation of these standardised templates. So if we go to the next slide, this sort of shows really where we are. So we've been working on this throughout the year, and at the start of the year we started with the gap analysis that we'd carried out, and that table there shows the number of questions each DNO was asking across the commercial and technical elements of pre-qualification. As you can see, quite a considerable amount from some DNOs, maybe not enough detail from other DNOs, but if you think of it, you know, that commercial one, for example, would need completing by a provider that wants to enter into the market across all of those DNOs, would be completing 320 questions, which is quite a lot. So what we've done over the course of the year through developing these standard templates is now reduce that to 30 standard questions for commercial qualification, and we've got 34 standard questions for technical qualification. So technical being the questions that you would answer in respect of the assets that you want to enter into the market. And for that, we've created a sort of a standard data layer that's going to be replicable across all DNOs and can be used, whether it was to be used as a manual spreadsheet submission. It could be used for a CSV upload, or it could be used for API qualification as well. So if we go to the next slide, this is an example of the commercial template. So yeah, apologies, it's a bit of a busy slide. There's a lot of information on there, and I'm not intending to go through all of that in detail. But as you can see there on commercial, we've got these areas, these categories around company information, the T's and C's, due diligence checks, and questions around insurance. And alongside the actual question, we've also got field names so that we can, use those for that sort of data layer across CSV or API submission. And we've also detailed what the allowable responses are, so the responses that we require in respect of that, and what the pass criteria is for each of those questions. And what we've also got, which I haven't popped on this slide, is a description and a detail of how, describing what the question is asking and how we expect that question to be answered. So if we just go to the next slide, this is kind of a summary of some of the sort of highlights, the big wins that we've achieved through this commercial standardization. So in terms of the contracting party, we've really reduced the number of questions that were asked in that area. There were a lot of examples of in the case of your organisation is this, and some questionnaires were asking, 3 or 4 different addresses or details associated with the party that was entering the pre-qualification. That's really reduced into a one-size-fits-all. We've also vastly reduced the number of due diligence questions. This was quite a big area for the project team. So every DNO was asking quite a number of questions, all trying to get to the same point, basically, to make sure that we had sufficient information to check the good standing of the organisation that we're potentially entering into contract with. But asking it in different ways and with different number of questions. So we've got a much smaller set of questions there and a standardised set of questions there. And also in terms of insurance, again, a lot of variation in this area. Some DNOs were asking for evidence of a motor vehicle insurance, for example, because that aligned with what they did under usual BAU procurement activities for anything else that they're procuring within the business. So we've really focused on what we're looking for here in terms of it being for flexibility, and making sure that we're only asking what we need to know, and that those insurance limits that we're asking for are as low as they can be, so that there's no barriers there in terms of the value that we're looking for in terms of insurance. There are a couple of deviations in terms of the commercial template. So one of those is from NGED. So we've already adopted the standard agreement as a overarching contract, so a framework style contract, and that means that we sign the agreement up front at the point of pre-qualification with the service provider, and as such we need to collect billing information up front as well at the point of contract. So that will be a deviation that will happen through a separate process, a secure process that I'm going to put in place. And as other DNOs begin to adopt an overarching contract approach as well, then they will likely collect the information in a similar way. And the second deviation is MPG will need to continue to collect their required information security data, and again that will be collected through a separate process, so they can ensure that they've got that in place that they need. But we see that as they also move towards an overarching contract, they can start to include that information security data as part of the contract and get that signed up front as part of the contract, rather than collect it through pre-qualification. So these are sort of deviations that will move away over time. So if we go to the next slide, this is our technical standard template. So again, these are the 34 questions that we've agreed on, looking at the status of the connection of the asset onto the network, looking at the location and the technology type, and the sort of parameters of the asset. So its running capability, its capacity, its duration, its response time, that kind of stuff, and also the metering, so looking at the granularity of the metering that can be provided for the asset. So and again, there we've got those allowable responses. We've been clear on the pass criteria, and we do have descriptions for all of these criteria as well. So the next slide, again, I've highlighted some of the big wins from this. So again, connection status. This was another difficult one for us to resolve. Assets can come into flexibility markets with any kind of connection status. They could be connected and energized and exist already on the network. They could be in plan. They could come from an aggregator that is still recruiting assets. So what we've developed is a kind of one-size-fits-all approach. The questions we have there will allow any type of connection status to enter into this pre-qualification. In terms of technology identity, again, we've consolidated the way that we were asking for technology types into a standard set of groupings, and they also align with reporting requirements that DNOs need as well in terms of regulatory reporting and the information that we need to put together. And again, the DER parameters, we've looked at those and made sure that they are aligned to other working group outcomes. So the metering requirements, for example, so that that they do take into account future changes that are happening as a result of other technical working groups across open networks. There is again another slight deviation here on technical qualification. So NGED are proposing that we collect an additional granularity of data where we see multiple assets with varying technology types that are metered at the same point of connection. So if a home has an EV charger and it also has a heat pump, we'd like to see that extra layer so that we can understand that there's two assets connected at the home that are metered from the same metering point, and that will help us improve our baseline accuracy. This is quite a new change that NGED have proposed for the way that we collect data, and it is being considered across the working group, but potentially a change that would be adopted. So the next slide is just an overview of our next steps. So over the course of September, we've been finalising these standard templates. Really crossing the T's, dotting the I's, making sure that all the descriptions and the supporting information along with these templates is accurate and agreed. We're still working with various stakeholders. Market platforms, for example, just to make sure that these are workable and that they can be adopted into existing systems. In terms of implementation, some DNOs potentially want to start using this pre-qualification in line with when they do their next procurement activity. Many DNOs do a procurement activity in autumn, generally around October. But obviously there is, we're very close to October now. There is dependencies on these templates being ready and dependency on systems being able to adopt the changes. So there may be some early adoption from DNOs, but all DNOs have committed to implement these changes by March 24. And that they'll need to do some sort of internal review to understand when that can be. And our next objective within the working group is to collect that information and make sure we set out a very clear plan for implementation that looks across each DNO individually. And we'll also be creating a report to document all the work that we've done this year, document the standard templates, and produce a version of the standard templates that can be published. And we're hoping to do that again towards the end of October, early November. So that's it from me. That's my last slide in terms of my update. Is there any questions, comments?
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Helen. Very great to see how we've gone from 600 questions to 60 odd. So very impressive piece of work the working group have done there. We've got a hand up from Graham.
Yeah, thanks. Just a question is, you've considered on your standardised pre-qualification questions across DNOs, but have you considered how they align with the ESO market pre-qualification questions, or is there any work planned to sort of standardise questions across the different flexibility markets when ESOs and DNOs?
Yeah, so the ESO were part of the original gap analysis work that we undertook in 2022, and they have been sitting across the working group this year. What we've identified is that the ESO does ask a number of different questions for different and justifiable reasons because of the difference in their markets. So full alignment across ESO and DSO may not be it may not be practical really in terms of the questions that we need to ask, but I guess that is the challenge that we need to put to ESO over the remainder of this year and into next year, is that where alignment can be met, that we can adopt that alignment, but there will continue to be differences. There are a lot of different requirements that they need to gather at that pre-qualification stage for their markets, and it varies sometimes from market to market as well, the questions that they need for that. So yeah, it's an ongoing sort of challenge that we'll continue to work on.
Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant, thanks Helen. Louis?
Hi Helen, yeah, just on the technology responses, you mentioned allowable responses. I assume there's some sort of other to cover sort of anything that's unknown. Sorry if that's a stupid question, but
yes, so we envisage that most of the technologies that might develop in the future are probably sit within demand, but we have included a more sort of generic, I don't think it's called other, I'm trying to rack my brain of what we've called it, but we have included like a generic demand category if it can't be found. I'll have to check what we've done with generation and storage. I think there's generic ones that exist for those as well, or more broader generalization of the technology. But yeah, there potentially could be technology types that do enter into the markets in the future that we haven't foreseen as part of this exercise. So, but yeah, something exists so that they can get in, and it's something that we'll have to keep an eye on and update over time.
And it kind of leads me on to another question. And this might be my lack of understanding of the sort of ENA process, so excuse me, but how often will the project be sort of reviewed, Helen? I.e., inevitably there'll be changes that various DNOs want to implement over time. How often will it go back to the drawing board on this?
Yeah, I think very similar to what's happening with a lot of the other working groups, is there will be this ongoing governance around updates. Again, maybe Avi or Reese might have more detail around how that will work, but yes, that there's definitely going to be an ongoing process to make sure that changes are identified, reviewed, agreed and implemented where they're needed.
But yeah, just a comment from me as well. It's great to see that we've gone from so many questions down to where we are, and it's really going to help a lot in terms of activity from our side. So appreciate the effort.
Great, thanks, Louis.
Thanks,
Sorry,
Louis.
just one point to add, Helen. I think in terms of governance, Lois, I think the intention is for us to adopt something similar to the engineering recommendation. So what we think we will look to do is to have it there as a formal structure of this is the standard, and then adequately identify the adequate frequency of review that needs to come for this. It could be something that we trigger or something that we do it as a default setting for every 3 months, 6 months, or a year. So that regulatory process and governance is something we're adapting that from a process that's already worked very well.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Avi. So I don't see any more questions. Will lead us nicely into a quick break. So if we can see you all back here at 11:20, we'll then go into our next topic of settlement processes. But yeah, see you again shortly. Hi everyone, welcome back. Hope you've all had a chance to stretch your legs and grab a cup of tea. And moving into our next exciting topic of aligning settlement processes, I'm happy to introduce Gavin Stewart from SSCN Distribution, who's leading this technical working group. So over to you, Gavin.
Thanks, Helen, and thanks everybody for having me along today. And yeah, I'm going to be talking about the good work that we've been doing with the settlement technical working group and how we're aligning on settlement processes. So if we can go on to the next slides, just as a bit of an introduction to settlement, the main outcome that we're trying to achieve is that settlement processes for the standardized flexibility service products to follow common settlement processes by April 2024. What we mean by that is that we measure and calculate delivery performance, verify and approve and settle in a very similar way. What we've tried to take the principle is that it should look and feel the same for service providers, regardless of where they're operating. Should that be in SSCN's patch, Scottish Power's, UKPN, or some of the other DNOs? Because we all have different processes internally, but it should still look and feel the same to the service providers. We'll go on to next slide. This is the milestones that we're working towards. The orange line is slightly out of date since I've done this slide deck, but we're now towards the end of September. What we've done is split the project into 3 tranches of deliverables. This allows us to move in an agile and at pace. So what we do is we take the first tranche, which is all based on the original focus group sessions and gap analysis that we've done. So we wrote down or defined everything that we think we should align on, went to the focus group, got their feedback on all of the items in our minded to position, and we then went away and started to design how these should look. So we split these into 3 different tranches, and originally they were based on the focus group's main priorities. And then we started to notice a bit of a pattern. So tranche 1, we're looking at basically the majority of the stuff that needs to be measured and the data that we're requesting. Tranche 2 then is going to look very much at the calculations. So once we've requested the data that we need for settlement, what are the calculations that we're applying to that data? And then finally, the third tranche is looking at the processes and billing probably of how that's going to look. So in terms of operating agilely, what we try to do is come up with the agreed alignment for the items in tranche 1. Everybody gets to go away and deliver that, while we then work on the items for tranche 2 and so on and so forth, with the aim of overall alignment by next April. There are some caveats to that some of the information, that there's dependencies on other technical working groups and also service providers, because we all use and service platforms. So most DNOs have platforms in some shape or form for perhaps procurement, but for settlement and dispatch as well. Our service providers and platform providers will need time to implement some of the changes. So we're trying to release that in as much time as possible. So what we've done is broken the first tranche down into several items. So if we go on to the next phase, we'll go through each of the delivery items from tranche 1 and what we've settled on. If we go on to the next slide, sorry. So the first one, for item 1, we're starting to look at metering granularity. So what we've agreed to align on is that we would accept minute by minute or half-hourly data. We noticed that some service providers prefer half-hourly, some provide minute by minute. So to accommodate all service providers, we said we'd accommodate both. There are some services where minute by minute granularity is preferred. And if a service provider chooses to provide a half-hourly data for that service, it's just something to be aware of, that data will be disaggregated. So much divided by 30, so we can get minute by minute data. And that can actually affect the performance monitoring and calculation accuracies. DNOs are to our target delivery was for the DNOs to adopt this wording into the October 2023 tender round. Overall, though, the target is April 2024. So if some DNOs are but behind on that, it's not necessarily a major issue because that was our commitment, but these are the stretch targets. If we go into item 2, how often payments are made, this was fairly straightforward. We said that we'd be making payments on a monthly basis. It might seem quite a basic thing to line on, which it probably will be, but it's good to confirm that we are aligning on when we're making payments to our service providers. We've found that as we've started going into the nitty-gritty in some detail, that there's even little bits that we're misaligned on, so we keep on adding to the item log and list so that as even the smaller misalignments come up, that we can agree and align on them. It is worthwhile pointing out that even though the payments are made monthly, the date of that month could change, and that could be down to how our internal systems operate. But we will try as part of Tranche 3 to align the processes so it's at least within a certain time period. Okay, if we go to item 3 and 4, over and under delivery. So understanding is that the DNOs have agreed there will be no payment for non-delivery and no increased payment for deliveries over the maximum threshold. So as part of the focus group, we spoke about thresholds, and that's something we're going to look into more detail as part of Tranche 2 is how do we set the thresholds, what's the payment or the performance calculation between the lower threshold and what we're actually asking for and anything above it. So we're going to go into a lot more detail on that in Tranche 2, but what we're basically saying is that there's going to be no payment for non-delivery, of which there'll be a threshold, and there'll be no payment, no increased payment for delivery over the maximum threshold. And again, we're stretching the target to try and have that delivered by November 2023. Okay. Getting into a bit more detail now. The first 4 items were probably shorter conversations, but item 5 is around the requested metering data. So we have been working on a joint agreement on defined API parameters and CSV templates. We've completed our first draft of that, and we're working closely with the dispatch system operability technical working group, and we've had PNDC, who's appointed as part of that group, to invite them along to the call, and we shared the materials and talked through it with them and shared that. So hopefully that will feed into phase 1 of that technical working group. So for a number of these items, we have dependencies in other technical working groups. So for example, in this one, if we are dispatching in megawatts, we should be settling in megawatts. So, but some of us have settlement in kilowatts. So that's what we're starting to line on, and we will take the feedback from that technical working group and feed it into our API parameters and CSVs files. Hence the delivery plan at the bottom is that we'll agree on the standard messaging by April 2024, but the subsequent implementation standard, we'll probably look at autumn 2024. This is to reflect, again, as I've said, the effort of the platform providers to actually accommodate and make the changes to their systems. We don't want to make the change now to then have to rechange it due to some outputs from another technical working group. It's good to get this right and correct once. But the point being is that we're all going to agree on the same parameters and templates. So when we come to a service provider and we ask them to integrate with our system, it should look and feel the same. That we're asking, you can integrate with SSEN just as easy as you can with NGED or ENW or MPG, and similar with the CSV templates. So that's probably been the main piece of work we've worked on since July to September. And then on to item 6. There's been a lot of questions from service providers about metering accuracy standards during the focus group. I think it was Claire from ADE or Flexitricity mentioned about Code of Practice 11, not something many of us has heard about. So as a lead, I went and spoke to somebody in SSEN and got them to come along and share some details about the Code of Practice, and we all went away to review it. So we've agreed some wording that should be included in the service terms of the contract. So again, we have dependencies and other technical working groups that we have to make sure we're feeding into them so that that can be captured. And we refer to the Code of Practice 11. So this is all around about metering and the accuracy. And we are pointing out certain sections of that document. And then we're defining what we mean by boundary and asset level metering. The point where we're picking out certain sections and not complying or not insisting with compliance with the full Code of Practice 11 is that it's quite onerous in some places, which is specific to the balancing and settlement code. And again, I think our target was to have that implemented into the contracts service terms by October 2023 tender round. And if we move on to item 7, boundary and asset metering locations. So we've agreed that we would accept boundary or asset metering locations, and appropriate wording has already been included into the flexibility agreement. So that was a short discussion in the group. If we come on to the next slide, how we're following through the implementation stages is I recognise a few names on the call today. So we held the focus group back in July. My approach so far has been at the end of each tranche where we've agreed how we're going to align. We feed that back to the focus group members that are interested to replay back and feedback and confirm that we've met what we said during the original focus group in July. So it's that playback loop. Then we've got the almost the mandate that we can go away and deliver that, and then we move into tranche 2. And the objective is to do that each time. So apologies if this is repeat of the previous session we had earlier on this month. And this is the approach we're taking for this technical working group. I think that might be my last slide. And it goes on to Q&A. Hopefully showing good progress in the technical working group, and we're showing that we're working alongside the other technical working groups and feeding in where we need to. Happy to take any questions just now.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Gavin, for that overview. And I guess just to let everyone know as well, we will be having more focus groups around this area this year. So this work is more than the previous ones, still ongoing. And once we have a date confirmed for the next focus group, we'll definitely share that invite with all of you as well, if you have more of an interest. But yeah, please do feel free to raise your hand or drop any questions in the chat if you have any questions for Gavin. No, I don't see any questions. Clearly you've done a very good job presenting, Gavin, and it was all very clear. So thank you so much for that.
That's great. I'm going to drop off now, but if there's anything, you can drop me an email. That's great. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks, Gavin. And yep, if you do have any questions for presenters who have dropped off the call, just drop them to our email address and we'll pass them along.
Cheers.
So moving on to our next topic, we'll be looking at how we're trying to make dispatch systems of Flex services more interoperable through API standards. And to tell us more about that, passing on to Tim Mananta from UKPN, who's one of the co-leads on this technical working group, as well as Ross McPherson, who's supporting us from PNDC. So over to you, Tim and Ross.
Thank you. Thanks, Helen. Good morning, everyone. Still morning, yeah. Good morning, everyone. So we got a lot to update, so we have a very short period of time, so we'll do our best to only pick out the key items. If you could go to the slide 1, thanks. So this is probably our first presentation on the Insights Forum of this year. I think we have, in this part of the work, we have done this last year. We started the technical working group in March. So over the last many months, we have made some progress, very good progress. So a lot of things happened. We have onboarded PNDC, who is now with us, Ross from PNDC with us, to update you a bit more, and they're delivering the work, some of the work here. And we have also engaged with Ofgem as part of this work, where they Ofgem had a report out in June around standardization for flex markets. And so we the OGS, Open Grid Systems, with consultants who commissioned who deliver that work for Ofgem. And also we have so by July, or this is by 7th of July, we had PNDC on board, and by 21st of July, we had the engagement plan and delivery approach agreed, and on the 7th of August, we had our first focus group session at the ENA. And since then, we have had a lot of engagement with the industry groups. We had a focus group, over 55 one-to-one interviews after that. So based on those, we are delivering some of the work here. And what actually we are doing, the phase one, we have got 3 phases. The first, the main objective of this working group is to, at least for this year, is to select a common standard for dispatch, flex service dispatch. So that's as per now the ENA detailed plan. But there are some of the things that we have introduced as part of the technical working group deliverables. So PNDC is delivering phase 1 and phase 2, and deliverable 1 is the high level assessment of gaps for all areas of flex services. Even though we are doing for dispatch, the discussion we had was that it may not be, holistically aligned with everything else. So that's why we are introducing deliverable 1, and then deliverable 2 is actually focusing on dispatch and doing the detailed requirements for dispatch. And both of those 2 deliverables are actually completed from PNDC perspective. So we are reviewing it from the technical working group level. So it just happened over the last week or so. And we are now going into phase 2, is basically that's the selection of the standard, which is in October. So in the next month or so, we would have a framework that we will develop with help of PNDC, where we can assess which standards meet the requirements for dispatch, also can be aligned with other areas of gaps. So it's quite a big impact that this will create, because the common standard will need to be adopted by all providers and all network operators. And the selection of the right standard is very key here, because it's once we have the standard, the changing from that, deviation from that would be different. So the implementation is something that we are really putting our focus at the moment, and how we should implement, and what are the actual implementation being one of the key requirements to actually assess this, even though it comes in phase 3, but it now, and I will pass it on to Ross, who will perhaps give you more insight on why that is the case. So yeah, Ross, over to you.
Thank you, Tim. And if you could move, thank you. So we spoke to various different service providers and different stakeholders, about 50, as Tim mentioned, and those views were on a range, a spectrum of different opinions and requirements, but the 2 sort of extremes of that was from the flexibility service providers and the DNOs or DSOs. So we've broken it down to those requirements for simplicity. So the flexible service providers definitely agreed that consistency in the market would be extremely beneficial to grow the overall liquidity, which is going to be beneficial for everyone. They also wish to have greater visibility of potential commercial opportunities, that is where assets would be useful within the network. They generally didn't mind about the specific platform or any of the technical details like that, provided it was consistent, it had longevity, and it was relatively simple to interface with. So that was a very clear steer that we got from them. There was also a strong preference for deploying something now, and iterating, and not to wait for the potential perfect solution, which might be in 3 or 5 years, because by the time that we design the perfect solution now, that may have moved on, and they would rather sort of get out the gate and go now. So very clear steer again on wanting to have something now, and then we can improve upon that. Another common factor was that FSPs would definitely like a common digital lifecycle for all of these different parts, including the tendering, the pre-qualification, contracts, dispatch, and settlement, which of course some of the other work streams are very well looking into. But it is interesting just to have that sort of reinforcement. One of the ideas we proposed was a confidence parameter. So this was the idea of an FSP saying they could provide 10 megawatts with 100% confidence, or 99 megawatts with maybe 90% confidence, and whether that would be useful for them, which they didn't have any strong feelings on, so that's useful feedback. And similarly, the FSPs had no strong feelings on whether there needed to be a unique asset identifier. However, that was one of the areas where the DSOs or DNOs would see a strong benefit. So it's all about marrying up those sort of two concerns and views. Next slide, please, Helen. Thank you. So similarly, flexible service providers also had a strong preference to employing modern technologies, such as HTTP REST rather than XML SOAP, which some systems currently deploy. But it's generally more difficult to get developers to work with these older technologies because there's a smaller ecosystem of available skilled developers in that area, which makes it more difficult and more costly to implement. So they gave us a very clear steer to head towards sort of more common, tried and tested modern technologies. They further highlighted the importance of trial sandboxes to explore and experiment. So this was a preference even above documentation, because a documentation or a standard could be interpreted slightly differently depending on how it is how it's written, how the language is structured. Where a sandbox, the flexible service providers could implement against that and sort of test, does this work, does this not work, and therefore be more reassured that their solution does work. Flexibility service providers also recognize the importance of cybersecurity, but definitely considered it takes two to tango sort of approach, where it needs both the DNOs and the FSPs to be involved. They would look forward to stable APIs for automation, but interestingly, they would also like email notifications for information to just inform them what's going on. And as I sort of highlighted before, they generally sought iteration on a design so that we can have something started now and then iterate over the next few years, a bit without breaking backwards compatibility. So this could be done through version systems, long-term support packages, and different versions of the API, and through a few options. Next slide, please. And onto what sort of DNOs or DSOs would want. So one of their big ones was data portability between dispatch platforms. And this relates to if it takes a long time to onboard a particular flexible service provider, and then the dispatch platform that particular DNO is selected to implement, they transition away from, in line with a 2-year competitive tendering process. They don't want to have to go back to that FSP and ask them again, can you please re-sign up for this brand new system? So that data portability would allow them to move all of their FSPs from the old system onto the new system without any interruption in service. They also noted the need to integrate with a range of internal systems. So this could include things like network data in order to move more towards a real-time flexibility service market and be more useful and responsive. They also wanted linkage with market data. So that's linking in with the different sort of modules in the ecosystem, the market data, the dispatch and settlement. Having those all together in a single platform would be very useful for the DNOs. So they're not having to reach into multiple different systems and then join them up retroactively. They also wanted clear control and accountability for platform interactions and issues. So what I mean by that is if the platform is hosted by a third party, who has control and accountability over that in the event of an outage or issue. And so that was something that identified a gap and something we will investigate. And finally, they would like and value having a simple user interface where they can transition from sort of a more current manual approach onto a sort of web-based approach, and finally onto automation. Next slide, please. So as part of our work, we identified various gaps, and we've broken these down into the same delineation that Ofgem employed, with gaps in coordination, flexibility procurement, dispatch and control, platform transaction settlement, platform market services, and analytics and feedback. We found most of our gaps were actually in coordination and dispatch and control, with a few in flexibility procurement on the more technical side, and only a handful in the remaining three. We also looked at other gaps with regards to cybersecurity, because as I said, it does take two to tango, and it's important to understand where that line of elimination is, and who has what responsibility. Also looking at the governance and accountability of how to progress this system or standard going forward, and a gap between the difference between a standard and an API, where the API could be an implementation of a standard, but may not be as interoperable as a standard. Off the back of this, we looked at the minimum requirements. This was for our second deliverable, and this is what are the absolute minimum things that would be required in order to implement and this minimum viable product to have a dispatch system working. So we broke it into the four different areas. First of all, communication, so that is sort of what language is being spoken to between the different parties, which of course leads on to the architecture, and that is who are the parties that are communicating with each other. Security, of course, is related to safely securing that link between the parties, and testing, it would really help out in the interoperability of the whole system through having a testing suite. A platform can test against the testing suite, and therefore know that they are fully compatible with the other side of the line, sort of the party that they're integrating with. So off the back of that, we looked at some basic architectures, and down at the bottom right of the slide there, you can see three provisional architectures that we proposed. So in the orange boxes, they are flexible service providers, and on the green boxes, green and blue boxes, they are DNO, DSO, or ESO control dispatch systems. Sorry. So the one on the bottom left is a common dispatch system, where all of the FFPs speak to one common system, and all of the DNOs also speak to that common system. So the advantage with this from an FFP perspective is it doesn't matter where in the country they are, they will connect to one platform. It's very simple. The disadvantage is that governance and accountability from the DNO's perspective. The middle diagram shows where each DNO region may have their own dispatch platform or system, denoted by the green and blue boxes, and the clients would individually connect to each of those, where you can have one client connect to two separate providers. And the one on the right is more a sharded approach, where it's a one-to-one relationship between the flexible service providers and the DNOs. The advantage with this one is it allows a lot more for versioning of systems, because rather than simultaneously upgrading everybody, you can upgrade it on a per link basis, which would allow for a more smooth transition. And as we sort of move left to right along those diagrams, the initial complexity goes up, but the resulting complexity over time would go down. Next slide, please. And in a similar way, it was just worth considering the surrounding ecosystem. So on the bottom right hand side here, in the orange and green boxes, you've got the dispatch elements, but that will also have to link into the market side, the settlement side down the bottom left, and other systems such as balancing reserve and stability market. So we were just sort of seeing how this might slot in with the rest of the ecosystem. And on the top left, there's a few different approaches that flexible service providers could employ, where the FFPs are in the middle, and they would be able to either connect to one-to-one relationship with a DNO on each side, using an individual client for each DNO, or a shared client for both DNOs. And for some assets, it may be that they're speaking to two DNOs and also ENO. So there are a few different architectures that we looked at. Next slide, please. And are there any questions on that?
Great, thanks Tim and Ross for that overview. Just while people are considering their questions, I'll quickly scroll back up our chat, as there was a question earlier today around API. Let me just see if I can find that. So yeah, there was a question from James from Apex around, will the standard APIs include fields and attributes or just specify the protocol?
So that relates to the communication side. If we go back a few slides, back there. So this relates to the minimum requirements. So under dispatch requirements on the top right, you've got communication, security, testing, and architecture. So the communication part, that's what that relates to. And so yes, it would be included in the standard, but it also needs to be in relation to all the other parameters, otherwise it won't work in the whole ecosystem.
Also, probably I would to add on that is the objective of our exercise is to hopefully select a existing industry standard rather than us creating one. But we are trying to be agnostic to what the answer is at the moment. It needs to meet the requirements. Once we go through the requirements and we meet the requirements, and something that, you know, as Ross mentioned, the governance and accountability is quite key. So once we select the standard that is already in place in the industry, then there is we can de-risk that because we don't have to govern and manage it. But again, without I wouldn't want to preempt this now until we can go through the process.
Brilliant, thanks Tim, thanks Ross. Question from Graham.
Yeah, thank you. So it's quite similar to my question earlier. I think I'm just trying to make sense of what this means for assets using different platforms currently within different markets. But maybe you might not have got this far. You're still considering the sort of standards and what you want to do rather than got to the platform stage yet. But do you have a feeling of where it might go, and even how it might fit with the ESO markets and ESO market platforms?
Yeah, it's a number of questions there. I can start answering that, I guess. So the starting point or the principles that we agreed in the ENA technical working group was the objective for us is to select a standard or have a standard, common standard. So it should be agnostic to technology or agnostic to particular platform or any particular vendor. But that's our main principle. But what I guess has come out now with this work is it can't be just, we can't just look at a standard. It has to look at the whole architecture as well as, and also the implementation. I think the second part of the question is around implementation and what, so the expectation is that the network operators and then they obviously the platform providers who are working on behalf of network would adopt this standard once the standard is selected. The question around the ESO, we are still working with the ESO at the moment to understand the impact for ESO here. So we don't have a clear-cut answer now, but yes, ESO is part of the technical working group, if that answers your question, but still we haven't defined the full impact on the ESO's implementation.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. And do you have a rough timeline on implementation? When do you think you'll start considering that and maybe have an answer?
Implementation as per the ENA detail plan, we've got implementation timeline given as the summer flexibility tender for next year. So exact dates on what that actually means as implementation, we are still working on that at the moment. But that's what as appears in our detail plan. But as I think Ross mentioned, there's probably a few challenges that we have highlighted that we may have to consider for any implementation decisions.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a lot.
Thanks, Tim. We've got a question in the chat from David. Is the common information model being considered?
Yeah, that's a good question. So common information model was the recommended standard in the Ofgem's report that I mentioned in the first slide, and that came out in June. So this is definitely a standard, and there are other standards. I think there are 7 standards assessed as part of the report as well. So this is definitely one. The answer is yes. This is definitely part of the various standards that we are looking at the moment. There's IEEE, there is OpenADR, there's you said there's a number of other industry standards. Like ICC.
Great, thanks, Tim. Okay, any final questions before we move on? No, doesn't look like it. Okay, great. Thanks so much, Tim and Ross, for your presentation. And if any other questions come up later, we'll share these with you over email.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so just moving on to our final topic of the day, a quick overview of what's coming up next for Open Networks just within this 2023 work plan. So you've got a little timeline there on the screen. The dark green arrows we've completed. So you can see so far this year we've done a phase of stakeholder engagement already. So we've done this through many focus groups, our industry challenge group meetings, and these insights forums as well that we've been having quarterly. This is to inform kind of how we're developing our work to have the best impact for stakeholders. And it's very much our plan to continue working very closely with industry on the areas of work that are still in development, for example, settlement that you've seen today, as well as operational data sharing, the next version of the standard agreement for procuring flex services, etc. So we definitely really appreciate all of you being here today. Hope to see you at the next forum, and we'll also share invites with you all as and when the dates are confirmed for the focus groups that are coming up for the more specific areas of work. So really appreciate you attending those or sharing with your colleagues who might have the best insights. So what we're doing now is just in process of developing our proposals for standardization and alignment across our work areas. Between now and April 2024 is when we're planning to finalize these and pass them on to the individual DNOs and ESO to implement. And in April, May next year, we'll be looking to publish the next version of our success framework that Avi and Reece shared earlier this morning. And the aim of this is very much to provide transparency to industry, government, and all of you here today on how we're defining success of our Open Networks programme, and give you that visibility of when each individual network company has actually implemented those recommendations on the ground. So hopefully that really shows you our commitment to the impact for stakeholders. So yeah, do share your feedback with us as and when these things are shared early next year. And another thread that we'll be working on that we've mentioned a little bit throughout today as well is future-proofing the governance of all of our work. So for example, where we've made recommendations of common flexibility products or those pre-qualification questions, what we want to avoid is that misalignment coming up again in the future. So we will be looking with a very sharp eye at our governance processes, making sure all these things have an appropriate home and a change process as well, so we can make sure that this work remains in place and has that good impact for stakeholders. It definitely won't be a one-size-fits-all approach because of the wide range of the Open Networks programme. So that could include things like engineering recommendations, codes, or forms of open governance. But yeah, more coming in this space. So this was kind of a very quick overview of what's coming up in the future. As for 2024 and beyond, I think we'll share more thoughts on that with you in the December Insights Forum. So definitely hope to see you there. And just a quick slide there on what's coming up if you want to engage more with the ENA. So our annual Energy Innovation Summit is coming up in person in Liverpool on the 31st of October, and sign-ups are still open for that, so we'd love to see you there. And as part of our Next for Net Zero series, there will be a webinar on building a resilient energy system. And finally, there is another in-person forum, the Transport and Energy Forum, coming up later in November, just looking at how the energy and transport sectors can accelerate their progress towards net zero. So that's looking like a really good event as well. And the link to the slides is in the chat, but I'll pop it in the chat again just so you have access to that, and you'll be able to click on all these links to sign up for these events. So this brings us nicely onto the last section of the meeting, which is for open discussion, Q&A, reflections. So please do feel free to raise your hands, pop questions in the chat, and talk to us about your thoughts on anything we presented today or anything else around the Open Networks programme.
A couple of questions that I picked up on the chat. I think one from David, please just respond on the carbon reporting. David, the C31E submission of 2023 obviously is done. The technical working group have just recently come up with their proposals for the amendments that were currently being reviewed across the year. And like Reece mentioned, that publication of that is imminent. So as soon as it's formally approved in our governance process, that'll go live on our website. Happy to send you a version if that's useful as well. There was another question from Anne Claire about the wider groups. As things stand, and I think there's currently in discussion, so these activities we're trying to feed back our experience in stakeholder engagement, what's working, what's not as well. So with regards to whole system and connections, they're at different pace and a different approach to what we are doing in Open Networks at this time. But it's very much the intent to ensure that the engagement is ongoing. So it's probably going to come directly from an ENA central newsletter. That's perhaps the best point of convergence for the moment. But if there are more specific stakeholder engagement needs across those groups, that'll probably be an avenue to start with as well. So for this moment, I'll only say watch this space, but it's very much in the pipeline, and that's something we're strongly considering and debating on how do we best engage the stakeholders, because we are mindful of stakeholder fatigue, because we can't just have 5 webinars just because we have 5 working groups. We need to find a way to make that happen. That's something we're deliberating internally. Did I miss any other questions? I don't know. Any other questions? If I have missed, please feel to come off mute and just raise it right away.
Thanks, Avi. Hand up from Louis.
Yeah, hi, Avi. Just in terms of what happens from here, with regards to the work that's in place at the moment, when that comes to an end, and sorry if I've missed this, the work that you guys do is fairly new to me. I was involved in the July workshops, but that's the first time I've sort of been involved at all. So if there's sort of further thoughts and feedback, and for example, a couple of things I've thought of around the product specs across the market. How's that feedback collected, and how does that feed into the next sort of tranche of work? What's the best forum for me to provide that, I guess, is the question.
We are always open to your input. So on the first instance, you can just mail me, Helen, or Reece, depending on we'll happy to reach out to you on that capacity. But having said that, the way we approach the program historically has been one tranche to the next. We think it's probably sensible wherein we look at a prioritization of tasks, set an objective, set an end game, and now we have initiated the discussion internally and with our key stakeholders, including Ofgem, DESNZ, to see what our next steps should be. because the momentum is perhaps the key in this journey of transition, and we've developed good momentum in 2023 with getting the focus group going and all the stakeholders around invested in the program. So we certainly don't want to let go of the momentum. As to prioritization of those tasks is an activity we look to do with our stakeholders, both internal and external, over the next few months. But what we are trying to do is we're trying to dissociate our focus on delivery, which is taking us till April, and then having the conversation of what happens next.
Yeah.
The intention is to do them parallelly, such that come April or March, when we are more or less ticking off like done, we basically just kick off the next bit and just keep going.
Great, yeah.
And any feedback you have in terms of what, when, how, I guess we are the best people to reach out to in the first instance. There is likely to be more forums similar to these, either webinars or focus groups or just sort of stakeholder engagement events that we will look to set up anyway.
Mhm.
But the intention is that there are various means to do it. As long as we receive the message, that's what we are after. So don't feel compelled to attend all of them. If you have views, please do pass on. Obviously, for us, what is important is to ensure that what we are doing is useful and is also, like I said, fit for purpose. So the importance and the onus is on what that actual message, rather than which vehicle we choose to pass it on. So
Sure.
yeah, the short version is reach out to us, and I'm all ears anytime. Please don't wait for any specific forum. That's as simple as I can be.
Great. Thank you. Lovely.
Brilliant. Thanks, Avi. Got a hand up from David next.
Hi, David McLennan from the EIC. Really, really good presentation. So thanks to all the presenters for all the detail and the work that's gone into that. I'm going to take you right back to the start. There's a reference made to the whole system CBA, which has been delivered previously. I'm just wondering how much use has actually been made of that whole system CBA by the networks, and if some examples, worked examples, are available for reference.
This tool was focused externally, David. So whilst some of the network companies have used to assess their benefits or impact from an innovation project, it is more from an external stakeholder to kind of use the different parameters from a DNO world to see how they can probably characterize their work. But there are use cases and user guide available on the website. Happy to send that to you offline. At this moment, the tool is we've left it in a place of I want to say stagnation for us, for a lack of a better word, is because we think that there is a time or set of time needed for the industry to go away and use this before we start sort of tinkering and shaping it or changing it any further. So the basic intent for now is all the stuff needed to use it, including the tool guide and other use cases, are there. In fact, there are a couple of videos on YouTube to as a user guide as well, because we want to encourage people to use it. And that's been put together by the lead. So I'll be able to send that to you if that's useful. But that's beyond that. At this stage, we've not mandated use of that in any capacity. It's a tool that people can access, and we look to encourage them to use.
That's really useful. Okay, thank you very much, and I appreciate the links to that, just to help me make sure I'm looking at the right stuff. Thank you.
Yeah. On a slightly related note, I suppose, David, most of our, or not most, all our documents are on the website, available for open access and freely download. So it might just very well be saying whole system CBA plus open networks, you should get it. We have received some feedback on our website, and we're trying to overhaul that as well to ensure that we can ensure that we have more targeted content, because we know there's 5 years and a wealth of knowledge there. But if it's overwhelming that you can't access it, it's not fit for purpose. So we are working on that in the back end. But as things stand, I mean, I will collect the links and send it to you, but easiest might be just saying whole system CBA open networks. You'll probably get the zip folder that has everything in there.
Okay, cool. Yeah. If you could send me links, because if you've kind of alluded to there, it's not always the easiest to find what you're looking for on the NA website, even if you know it's there. But yeah, that would just maybe save me a little bit of effort. Thank you.
Absolutely. Sure.
Great. Thanks, David. We've got a hand up from Graham as well.
It's been a really helpful session, really helped sort of increase my understanding of what's happening and where you're going. But going back to what you're saying at the beginning, there's still a gap between the tendered flexibility and the contracted flexibility. So what what is happening more widely to understand the reasons why there's that gap, and what's been taken when you identified the sort of the reasons for it, like, and as and when barriers are identified, how you sort of continue to take forward new work, or maybe open networks or other partners taking forward new work. So what's the plans there? Is that part of next year's scoping for the next year's activities in the programme, or maybe off we're doing that? It'd be helpful just to understand that a bit more. Thank you.
To answer that, I think I'll just go through the journey we've taken on. So over the last few years, the attempt was to test the market and see what the appetite for flexibility is. So whilst we set out with the 4 standard products, sustain, secure, dynamic, and restore, which is more like, I think like Laura mentioned, a more an external affairs sort of comms name rather than what it does. We went there and we were all starting off from a common point. But while testing market and ensuring that there is adequate flexibility from the market, each DNO working with their stakeholders had slight variation in interpretation, like Laura alluded to. So the effort we took on this year is to ensure that the existing products are firstly standardized. So that's the intent. And the remaining bit we are leaving open for innovation, like I mentioned. Coming to the point of what we do next, we are looking to have the existing standards embedded in some form of governance that's such that we are not going to be having a repeat of this discussion saying that there are few more interpretations of the now standard products. We want to ensure that that is always kept in check and we manage that to deliver it such that it is consistent. But over and above that, what we're also looking to do is we are free to trigger any learnings from the individual DNO exercises. So for instance, like the energy efficiency that Laura was talking about, and perhaps you raised earlier, was that if there is value in bringing that into the fold, we will then ensure that that's then a new standard product. So the agenda here is to achieve a bit of a pragmatic balance between innovation and standardization, because one can get in the way of other if we don't get the balance right. And like Helen mentioned, we are ensuring that the frequency of reviews of these standards are maintained such that we ensure it's doing what it's set out to do and doesn't then become a new barrier in the market. Have I answered your question, Graham?
Yes, sort of. But I was also wondering, is there like an information gathering exercise ongoing across all DNOs to understand why aren't you tendering why aren't you contracting the tendered flexibility, and then what's the sort of feedback loop from that?
Of course. So that's obviously very much the focus for the program and individual DNOs, Graham, because whilst we are doing most of the work centrally with the support of all the members, end of the day, individual DNOs put out their tenders out for their procurement exercises, and they have their own targeted stakeholder engagement, which obviously comes back into the program as well, because they are the same subject matter experts who are shaping these outcomes. And having said that, the intention for us to engage with that, or to go back and saying what the barriers were, things we are doing this year is a reflection of all those feedback. So one of the reasons for not having adequate liquidity was, say, lack of standard, lack of transparency, which we're trying to address now. There are a few other stuff like, ability to stack services that we started looking into now, and perhaps will become a key element next year, because what would be useful as an asset of flex service provider is to say, suppose this is the portfolio of I guess, things that you can offer flexibility to, which of them can you stack service so that you can optimize your offerings. That is something we'll look to do. And this is an ongoing feedback loop, and it's not something that we want to do like every 2 months or so. It's something that each and as and when we get it, we reflect upon it and then trying to prioritize to see which is the most efficient and highest impact that we need to go and prioritize.
Great, no, thank you. That makes sense.
Great, thanks, Avi. I think we've got a question on the chat from Louis. So do you have any estimates on flexibility within the various asset types that is not currently contracted?
I'm not sure I understand. What does that mean? Sorry, because we can only tell the technology type based on the contract. So if they're not contracted, I'm not sure what you're after. Sorry, could you elaborate on the question, please?
So sorry, Avi. Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get to, I'm trying to understand. So we work predominantly in the I&C market, and having spoken to a couple of DNOs, most recently in ENWL, they had fairly sizable tender is this gap that we're sort of talking about here. So I suppose what I'm trying to look for is to understand, and whether that's from the DNOs or somewhere else, is there data out there to give at least even an estimate on, okay, well, within the tendered areas, I guess what I'm trying to get to is that gap ever going to be met? Does that make sense? Are the DNOs looking for flexibility that isn't there, or is it there? And if it is there, how much is there? Does that make sense?
Yes. See, I would be surprised if it's 100% met, because the very nature of DNO flexibility requirements, they're geographic.
Yeah.
But it is clear that there is a lot of flexibility out there that's currently not on the market, or the DSO market. It's probably not going to be 100% is the quick answer to that question. But in terms of the actual flexibility, I won't say technology, flexibility, say service providers, what we tend to do is we are trying to set up a market which is technology agnostic.
Yeah.
And have them understand the opportunity there is. So I guess in terms of market proliferation, there are different exercises. There is one element of setting up the market in a transparent and consistent fashion, but there's also an element of educate and promote. And that is something we are looking to do as well, because quite often I do go on quite a few of these conferences and panels where I discuss to folks like, oh, I didn't know this is an option for me. So at the moment, that is also a key part of our work, to inform that this is there and this is an offering that you can then access. So whilst this work that you've seen today is perhaps on the techie side of things, talking about ramp time and the API standards, there is probably more a social engineering aspect of it, just to communicate to the wide world, saying that what does this mean and why does it matter to you. And that's something we are doing as well in various forums. So I would probably point you to some of those sort of simple articles we go out and put out there. So for instance, we try to use the example of a traffic congestion and a roundabout to explain flexibility, because there are so many things out there. There's REMA, and there's wholesale market, and there's price signals with the supplier. So where do we all fit in? So there is a fair amount of work where, I guess, as subject matter experts, in this industry, we need to come together and have the conversation. From our side, we are looking to kind of shape offerings to the different problems that they are. I don't think it's a one size fits all, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Abby. Any final thoughts? Okay, brilliant. Thank you all so much for joining us today. As we mentioned earlier, we will share a recording of today's session on YouTube and circulate the slides and all the links that you need following the session. And yes, please do reach out to us on opennetworks@energynetworks.org if you have any thoughts to share after the session. Thank you all so much for your time.